Hi, and welcome to the Striking a Balance Caregiver Conference. My name is Rob Fabian with Age of Central Texas. We are a local nonprofit organization that supports older adults and family caregivers. And along with our friends over at the Area Agency on Aging of the Capital Area, we're very happy to welcome you to our 22nd Caregiver Conference. Joining us today also is Patty Bordy, who is the Executive Director of the Area Agency on Aging. Hello, Patty.
Hello, Rob. Thank you. Hello, everyone. We are super excited this year that you are all joining us. We are going to have four, fun-filled, very informative days virtually, and then a Saturday event. This is all about you, so do not hesitate to ask questions. Do not hesitate to participate, and you are in for a treat. Thank you so much. So happy we could be here again. Appreciate y'all.
And we do appreciate you joining us today. As Patty mentioned, we're going to have 4 days of wonderful caregiver presentations, starting with ours today. Before we start our presentation, I want to do some very quick housekeeping. All of our sessions are going to be recorded. So if you happen to miss one or you want to share them with any of your friends, they're going to be available on our YouTube channel. And we're going to send you that link later on this week and the link to each one of our sessions. We're also going to send you a link to the Striking a Balance program because it's going to have a lot of great information in it for you to help you in your caregiving journey. And finally, as Patty said, this is for you. So we want to be sure that you are asking questions as we go along today. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat feature. If you click on it, it looks like one of those thought bubbles in the cartoons. Click on that and it'll open up the chat. And as we go along today, ask your questions. And at the end of our presentation, we are going to answer your questions. So I am so thrilled to have joining us once again, Dr. Barry J. Jacobs. Barry has been a great friend to all of us here in Central Texas. He has come and spoke at our Striking a Balance conference numerous times. He is a renowned author. He is a caregiving columnist. And for my money, he is one of the best experts here in the nation when it comes to caregiving. Barry, we are so excited to have you join us here today. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us about caregiving.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you, Patty, and thank you all for being here today. It's really my honor to be here with you. I love Austin, I love Central Texas, and I love caregivers. So this is a treat for me. And, Rob raised the bar pretty high for me. I better be darn good today to be one of the renowned experts. So, but you'll be the judge of that. Let me share my slide deck, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to do together. Okay, hopefully that's now visible for everybody.
Looks great.
Thank you, Rob. So, you heard Patty say a couple words that I really love. She said fun-filled and she said interactive. And so for those of you who have seen me present before, you know that I like presentations to be more like kind of animated conversations where you're swapping ideas with one another. And you can swap ideas with me in the chat box, or you can swap ideas with one another in the chat box. And that is the way we all learn from one another. So today's topic is engaging your family in the caregiving journey. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it in a second. But what I would encourage you to do is, to limber up those fingers and get ready to do some typing, because I have lots of questions for you to get your input, so that this is what they call a crowdsourcing experience. We're all sharing our knowledge together. So here's what I have in mind for us today. Okay. First thing here is what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk a lot about what we call advocacy. And I'm going to tell you in a moment the special sense of the word that I'm using for advocacy. I know, it's not about necessarily getting out on the picket line or sending letters to your congressman, but it's really more advocating for yourself as a caregiver. Not always the easiest thing to do. And then we'll talk specifically about, number one, advocating for yourself with your family, which if everybody's got a good family. I would say everyone has a family where there are some folks that hopefully they can rely upon and others that they can't rely upon. but I'm hoping that by and large your families are supportive of you. And then for folks that maybe their families aren't so supportive, or family members who aren't so supportive, I have some ideas for ways of maybe engaging them in the caregiving, so it's not all on your shoulders. And the second thing is advocating for other family caregivers, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's so important for all of us. And I'll just say another word about myself. And Rob told you a little bit about my professional credentials. I'm a psychologist. I'm a healthcare consultant. I'm a writer, but I'm also a former caregiver, and I took care of several different family members in my life. My dad had brain cancer while I was a teenager, and I saw my mom be the primary caregiver, but was also involved in caregiving as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old. But then certainly later on in life, in my 50s, I cared for my stepfather and mother, both of whom had dementia. My stepfather had Alzheimer's dementia. My mother had vascular dementia. And I learned, as much as I thought I knew about caregiving before I took care of them, I learned a heck of a lot more taking care of them. And that may be the most important credential for any speaker who's going to present to you. Have they walked the walk? So I just want to let you know I have walked the walk. See a couple things in the chat box here. One is it just a reminder to feel free to ask your questions, but here in the chat box. And the other is it says a question in Q&A function, not in chat. The chat is disabled. I check now. Thank you very much, Shmuel. So we're going to be using the Q&A box instead, it sounds like. Okay. So here goes. I have a question for you, just so I know better who's here and what your experiences are. And so in the chat box, I'd like you to put a number. What do we say? Not the chat box, but perhaps the Q&A, whatever works better for you. So here are some of the options. I'm the caregiver. I'm the primary and sole caregiver. It's 100% on me. If that's your situation, put 1. And here are other potential options. I'm the primary caregiver and others help me a little. That's 2. I'm the primary caregiver and others help me a lot. That's 3. In my family, we divide the caregiving tasks up equally, which I have found in my experience is a wonderful thing when it happens, but it doesn't happen all that often. Number 5 is I help the primary caregiver a lot, but that means I'm not the primary caregiver. That's 5. I help the primary caregiver a little. That's 6. Or I don't help the primary caregiver at all, but I am considering it. So if you could put some, I'm seeing stuff in the chat and in the Q&A, but let me just scroll through. I'm seeing a lot of 1s and 2s, 3 and a 4, a bunch of 1s. I see a 6, but mostly I'm seeing folks who are either doing it all on their own or they're doing most of it on their own. And let me just check over in the Q&A to see if that's the case there. 1s and 2s and 2s and 1s. And what I'm seeing, and I see a 4 there, which is Renita, that's wonderful. I'm so glad. Maybe we'll ask you about your experience a little bit later. But what I'm seeing is a lot of folks on this call are on the front line. They're doing it, if not entirely on their own, they're doing it mostly on their own. And that's very helpful for me to know. So I kind of pitch this call, pitch this information to you folks. Anyway. Thank you very much. I appreciate all those responses. And I see, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so I mentioned that I'm using the word advocacy in a certain way. And if you look up, I think this was from Merriam-Webster, that the specific definition of advocacy is the act or process of supporting a cause or proposal. So guess what? I am talking about the process of supporting yourself with your family and supporting yourself with other caregivers and in your community, as well as supporting those caregivers. And so that's what today's theme is. It's all about how do you advocate for yourself? For those of you who've raised your hands, what I'm going to say to you, Rob, if there's something I should respond to, please let me know and I will. Okay, so what do I mean by a caregiver who is also an advocate? And so I think you probably have a pretty good idea, but let's spell it out. So advocates who are caregivers who actively support themselves and others. So they are not people who are letting caregiving happen to them. They're not feeling controlled by caregiving, but as much as possible, they're taking what steps are available to them to manage the situations, manage the challenges that they're faced with. And in order to do that, they're doing a number of things. First of all, they're being active. They're not being passive. They're being what we call assertive. That means if they feel something, if they think something, they are expressing it. They are trying to make their views known as well as possible. They're not just sitting back and letting things happen to them. These are folks that also are very actively engaged in problem solving. And if there's one way I would define a good problem solver, it would be somebody who, a good caregiver, it's somebody who's a very good problem solver. That means, all the things that come up in every day and every week and every year, all the different challenges, we don't get locked into one way of caregiving. We're always thinking about the next solution. What new support can we use? Can we look to Patty at the Capitol, to the AAA, the Area Agency on Aging? Can we look to Rob at the Age of Central Texas to give us some ideas? We're looking to solve the problems that present themselves and to best help our care receiver. And as a result of being an advocate in this way, of being active, of being assertive, of being a good problem solver, these are caregivers who feel effective in what they do. And they feel helpful. They feel helpful to their care receiver. They may feel helpful to other caregivers, as opposed to feeling ineffectual and unhelpful. When people feel like they haven't been able to make a positive difference in caregiving, then they can pat themselves on the back and say, you know what, this is hard. It's hard as heck sometimes, but I'm doing okay. I'm doing a good job. I'm not doing a perfect job. Nobody does a perfect job, but I'm doing a good job, and I should feel pretty good about that. But when people feel like no matter what they do, everything falls apart, they're falling on their face all the time, well, I worry about those folks because they feel helpless and they feel hopeless. And helplessness and hopelessness are often preconditions for developing depression. So I want people to be as active and to be as strong an advocate for themselves and others as they can be. And maybe the last thing here is the most important thing. When people feel that they can make a positive difference, they maintain hope. And I don't mean that they maintain hope that they're going to somehow figure out a way to reverse dementia, because no one has figured out a way to reverse dementia. But the way to make the best of the situation, the way to help yourself survive and maybe even thrive in the situation, to help the care receiver feel as comfortable and as well as possible, and to help the family endure. That's the kind of hope I'm hoping all of you and all caregivers everywhere have. So let me, with that in mind, I see a couple of hands raised. Let me go back for 1 second, and I'm going to see Lehman's raised hand. Okay, and I'm not seeing it here. So, and I'll leave that to Rob to let me know if there's something I should address. So let's talk now very specifically about advocating within your family. And I want to present a make-believe scenario to you. This is one that is not based in reality at all. It's just a story that I made up after my 30+ years of working with caregivers. I think this is a pretty typical story. So here's the story I made up, and this is, by the way, this is just a photograph I found on the internet. And it shows a sister and brother, perhaps, or it could be a husband and wife, kind of talking things over, and maybe they don't agree exactly, but they're talking about things, and maybe coming to some meeting of the minds about how to meet the needs of the care receiver, how to meet each other's needs. So we'll call this family the Taylor family, and here's a story I made up. Since her father had a mild stroke several months ago, June, age 41, has been taking care of him at her house. Her two older brothers call occasionally, but don't offer to help her with the caregiving tasks. I know that's hard to believe that, us guys would fall down on caregiving, but, sometimes just out of the blue, it happens. In any event, Julie is tired. Excuse me, not Julie. Julie's the name of my wife. Excuse me. June is tired, and she needs help. So that's a setup. And let me ask some questions about this. So why should I have to ask my brothers for help? Dad is their father, and they should be here for him, not me. So I have heard this many, many times from caregivers. I don't want to ask my brothers for help, and I shouldn't have to ask my brothers for help. They should know better. This is their father too. They should be here. I shouldn't have to be scolding them into helping me. It's not my job. So for my first question to you, and I would ask you to put your response in the chat box, because I think the chat box is working. It's a little easier for me to access. Do you think June is right? Do you think that June is right, that she should not have to ask her brothers? First question. Second question, should she continue to expect that they'll step up and assist with caregiving tasks, or should she ask them? And if she's really reluctant to ask them, why is that, do you think? What might she be afraid of about asking them? So I am already seeing lots of responses, and let me see what we got here. And I thank you in advance for everything you put. So I'm just going to read a few of them, and then we got I can see we got some mixed opinions here. Alice says no, she shouldn't have to ask him. Lauren says yes, June is right. No, I'm sorry. The question was whether she's right. Alice says no, Lawrence is right, June is right, but June will need to ask them for help because they were clueless, okay? Thank you, Lauren. I didn't think about putting the word clueless in there, but maybe it fits the scenario. Brenda says no, Alice says ask, Brenda says ask, so Melissa says she should ask, Charlie says question and no, question two, ask. Jamie says no, they may think things are fine for her. Okay, I'm hearing a consensus emerging. June should ask. Anne says June should ask directly and specifically. She may not get what she wants, but she should ask for what she needs. Okay, I don't see anybody disagreeing here. Everybody is saying that she should ask. All right, let's see if anybody adds to the last one, because I see Brenda did here. What would June? Why would June be afraid of asking them for help? So Brenda, you put a response in here, which I was not expecting at all, is that she would be afraid of losing control. And I don't think you mean that she's going to go crazy or going to run out of the house screaming. I think what you're saying is that if the brothers get involved, she loses control over taking care of her father, and maybe she doesn't trust her brothers with getting involved in caring for him. And Brenda, if you could put into the chat box whether that is in fact what you mean, that would be helpful for me. I don't want to just try to read your mind. Okay, anybody else have answering that last question? Okay.
There's a good one here that says that she might feel like that she failed her father if she asked the brothers to help. Well,
Rob, you are absolutely right. That's an excellent one. However, that's also a very unfortunate one. It's about, she would feel that if she didn't do it all herself, that she would be a failure. And it'd be a failure in the eyes of her brother and brothers and in the eyes of her father. And that's a big issue for many caregivers. So whoever put that in there, put their finger on something very important, which we're going to talk more about.
A few other folks are saying that they might be afraid that the brothers will say no, or if they do say yes, that it'll complicate June's caregiving abilities.
I'm seeing that in here, Rob. And yes, I think that those two things are very common fears. And that the other thing that you just raised is something I've heard a million times. And that is, if I ask my brothers and they tell me no, I am going to feel crushed. And I don't want to feel crushed. This is hard enough. And not only that, but if I ask my brothers and they say no, I'm going to be angry at them, and I don't want to be angry at them, and I might even feel less kindly toward them, and I don't want to feel that either. So to avoid that, I'm just not going to ask them. I think that this group has already kind of anticipated a lot of what I'm going to say. We got complicated. I see Linda putting it here. There'll be more complications if the brothers are involved. We got June might feel hurt if they say no. She may feel like she's falling on her face or failing if she asks them. Maria says, and this goes back to Brenda's comment about that she would lose control. Maria saying if her brothers do help, they won't do things the way she thinks should be done, or maybe the way she thinks she knows things should be done, right? Because she may have very strong opinions, and maybe the brothers are in fact, as someone said, clueless. Right, that they don't really understand what the father's needs are right now, because guess what? He hasn't been living with them. The father's been living with June. She's with them for every day, all day, and she knows. And Donna's bringing up, what do they have? They have no siblings to ask. And what I would say, Donna, is that this is not just about siblings. I'm using an example where there are siblings, but this would be true for other family members as well. And so you might bring up the question, well, I mean, if the June is an only child, maybe it's just all on her and she doesn't have the option of asking for other family members. I don't think so. I think caregiving is a family experience, is a family responsibility. And if there are other family members involved, and I hope there are other family members available, then the same question holds. June could be asking her spouse, she could be asking cousins, she'd be asking aunts, siblings of the father for their help. There's lots of different people they could ask. Now, Anne is asking another question: what are the family members who are estranged from the father? And that sometimes happens. And I'm going to give you the short answer to that, Anne. What I recommend to caregivers when the brothers are angry at the father or have no relationship with the father is June says to the brothers, you don't want to have a relationship with dad, fine, that's up to you. But you have a relationship with me, and if you value your relationship with me, you'll do this for me, because I am getting tired as a result of caregiving dad. I need you to do this for me, not for dad. And that sometimes is something that caregivers can say, and other times they don't want to say. They don't want to put it that plainly to a sibling. Okay, let's go on to the next set of questions. But you're all already doing great. All right. Whoops, and I just went too far. Let me go back. Have a little trouble seeing my screen. All right. My dad is old-fashioned and thinks caregiving is women's work. He trusts me and wants me, not his sons, to take care of him. Okay, I can't, have you ever heard this before? I have heard this as well a million times, that, we all have gender roles, and women are socialized in certain ways and men are socialized in other ways. And sometimes that means men think that women do caregiving and men don't do caregiving. And I think this is probably a less prevalent gender view than it used to exist 20, 30 years ago, but I still think it's around. There are still people who believe that. So here are my questions for you. And again, I'd love your input. Number one, should June go along with her father's wishes in order to make him more comfortable? He wants her, not his sons, to take care of him. That's the first question. Two, is it okay if she wants help for herself, even if dad says he will feel embarrassed if his sons or home health aides help take care of him? So that's two. And the third one is, do you think she'll feel guilty if she has the sons, the brothers, or health aides to help care for dad if dad doesn't want anybody else but her? Dad may say, you're the only one who understands. You're my daughter. This is your job. Why can't you just do this? Your mother did it for her father. Why can't you do this for me? Okay, so let's see what we got here. And I'm seeing again many responses. Let's see. Joanne says no. Shouldn't go along with dad. Eugenia says no, not fair to put it all on her because of old-fashioned views. Michelle says she should ask for help if she needs it, regardless of dad's wishes. And yes, she'll feel guilty at first if she is used to being the only one caring for dad. Okay, thank you. And Maria says there are many sides of caregiving: grocery shopping, cleaning, cooking, etc., that could be delegated to others. Maria, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Dad doesn't need to know that someone else did the grocery shopping, or someone else maybe dropped off a casserole, or barbecue, or what, something good to eat. And Alice says she'll feel guilty anyway, so save herself, right? So what I'm hearing Alice say, and it's kind of an interesting point of view, is like, you're going to feel guilty under any conditions. So why don't you just go ahead and do whatever the heck you want to do, whatever you think is best for you, right? And that I kind of like that of you, Alice. Let's see what else we got. Nancy says she needs to find a way to work around this for the long haul. Eugenia says, okay to ask for herself. Dad may feel embarrassed, but it may be a good learning opportunity for him, even though dad doesn't really want any learning opportunities at this point in his life. Any others you see, Rob, that you'd like to call out?
Yeah, there's a great one here that says, by involving home health aides and her brothers in caregiving, June is still caring for her dad. It doesn't have to be 100% 24/7 hands-on for her.
I could not agree with that sentiment more. That is absolutely true. It doesn't mean that you either, it's like you do it all or bust, right? You're either like the 100% caregiver or you're nothing. It doesn't work that way, right? As someone else pointed out, there's lots of caregiving tasks, and we can divvy them up among other people, and that doesn't mean that that we've stopped caregiving. It means that we've kind of maybe lessened the amount of caregiving we've done, but we are still doing caregiving. As a matter of fact, I will tell you from my own personal experience that organizing other people to help with the care, as a number of you have already said, complicates things, and that's a caregiving task in and of itself. I mean, that's not an easy task at all, to organize a home health aides and family members, and who's visiting when, and who's bringing food over when, and who may be even helping with insurance forms, or taking someone to physical therapy. I mean, it gets complicated, and so June would be playing a very, very important role as not just a delegator, not just kind of handing things off, but facilitating, organizing. She would be the kind of care coordinator. Great.
There's another really good one here that says that the brothers could step up, and by explaining to their father how important it is for them to be a part of helping him. So that takes it away from the guilt of the father and puts it in the brother's hands of saying, Dad, it's important for me to be able to do this. So let me do this because it's something I want to do.
And I love that idea, but let me play kind of the contrarian here, which I'm pretty good at playing, by the way. So let's say the brother says, Dad, you're my dad, you're my father. This is really important for me to take care of you. And what does dad say? Dad, if he's really old-fashioned and stuck in his ways, he says, son, that's very nice of you to say, but this isn't your job. This is your sister's job. You could do some other things. I know you got your own family to take care of. Your sister, she's up for this task. She's fine. She doesn't need you at all. And so, Rob, what would you say in a situation like that?
That's a very good question. And I know both you and I have cared for our fathers. I'm still caring for mine. And I hear that's from my own dad of, oh, I don't need you to help me, even though my father had a brain bleed stroke 3 years ago. And last year we had 4 cardiac surgeries in 3 months. So yes, he does need my help. I just keep telling him, Dad, I'm doing this because I want to. This is my gift. You took care of me as a child. Let me just help you so that you can continue to do the things that you want to do. I think that's kind of the key to it. We always hear about the phrase of parenting our parents, But in reality, as caregivers, we do not parent our parents. A job of a parent is to train their children so they can turn them loose as productive adults in the world. Our parents are already adults. They don't need us to train them on anything. All we're doing is helping them continue to do the things that they enjoy doing, although we may have to do them a different way. And so that's what I see my role is helping my father continue to live his fullest life by helping him out. And it's not doing anything that is against what he wants, although sometimes we have to have those hard conversations. But it's more of, Dad, I'm doing this because I want to help you.
And Rob, I thought that was so well said. Thank you for sharing that. And I will tell you that I think that Dad may be stubborn and want his daughter to do this, but if I'm going to follow the example that Dad set because he's my dad, well, I'm going to be just as stubborn. I'm going to say, Dad, this is important to me. I want to do this for you. I want to help out my sister. I want to be there for you, and I intend to step up, and you and I will figure out how to work together comfortably on this. And so I'm so glad. Dad is very lucky to have you, Rob. And I would say, and for all the guys who are on the call, and I'm sure there must be a few, that's Rob sets a great example there. So I see, I think you guys have really covered a lot of really important points here. I would just say that, to put my 2 cents in on the questions on this slide is that I really do believe that, Dad has wishes. His most important wish is he doesn't want to go into a nursing home. Dad he wants to stay in the community. Maybe he wants to return to his own house or apartment one day. Or maybe the plan is for he's going to continue to live with June as he recovers from the stroke. But there's always multiple ways of fulfilling the end goal. If the end goal is staying in the community, staying out of a hospital, staying out of a nursing home, then we're going to work really hard, Dad, to make sure that wish of yours is fulfilled. But we're going to be very flexible about what methods we use to fulfill it. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to do all the care for you. It means that I'm going to delegate some of the care. Doesn't mean we're going to care for you exactly the way you want to be cared for all the time, because that's, may not work for me. And I have other responsibilities to take care of. Just like I'm not going to serve you for dinner exactly what you want every night. There will be times when I'm going to serve you dinner what I have available in the refrigerator or what I was able to get to the supermarket that day. And you know what? You'll be flexible and you'll enjoy whatever it is I make. And with the end goal here that you get well fed that night. So the point here is June will have to bring a level of flexibility and also assertiveness to this arrangement that she has with her father, and not have to feel guilty if she's delegating to her brothers, if she can engage her brothers in taking on some of those tasks. So got one other set of questions for you about June, actually maybe 2. So let me give you one more set here. All right, June says, and if I had a nickel for every time I heard a caregiver say this, then I would have been a rich man a long time ago, as the old saying goes. It's just easier if I do everything myself. Perhaps June doesn't want to bother her brothers because they have busy jobs and lives. Perhaps she doesn't want to put herself in a position in which she'll feel aggravated if they say no or don't provide the kind of help that she thinks Dad needs. Do you think June is right to do everything herself? What are the advantages of doing all the caregiving herself? Because honest to God, there are advantages of doing it all by yourself. You're like a board of directors of one, right? You get to make all the decisions. You don't have to argue with anyone. You don't have to negotiate with anybody. You just sort of say, this is how we're doing it. But there are also distinct disadvantages. And so what are the disadvantages of not involving other folks? So let's see what we got. I see caregiver burnout. I see it's teamwork. We all want to help. June jeopardizes her own health and her caregiving without help. So the message I'm hearing, and it's a great message that you're giving, is if June does it by herself, it means that she's likely, as I see here, and who said this nice phrase here. This is from Maria. If June does it all herself, she will burn and crash, which is really not such a good thing, but it certainly expresses, it kind of captures what we're afraid of. She can make it all, things happen. She can make sure things that get done. She can do things in a way that she knows is right, but she's going to make herself much more prone to burning out. Now, it sounds like everybody has a pretty good awareness of that. And so the question is always, and this is always a kind of risk-benefit analysis here that people do, is it worth involving people? Is it going to help me, or is it going to make my life harder? And I would argue, and I'm going to show, as I'm going to show in the next few slides, it is almost always better to bring other people in. That I've heard every possible rationale for caregivers that do it themselves, and honestly, they don't hold water with me. It's much better to have a caregiving team than to be a solo caregiver. The research suggests that solo caregivers are at risk of greater burnout, and when they burn out, they have worse health consequences, and the care receiver is more likely to go into a nursing home. So, I see great comments in here. Anything else that you want to point out, Rob?
I like the statement that says, I love my dad, but I still have a life to live, and I'll get outside help whenever I can.
Sounds good. Thank you. Good comment. Okay. So let's talk about guilt a little bit more, because honestly, the caregivers that I see that decide that they won't ask any other family member, that they're not going to go against what their dad says or the care receiver says. Whatever the care receiver prefers is what they feel is like the law of the land, and that they're going to continue doing this as long as they can in exactly the way they've been doing it by themselves and not involve anybody else. Almost always underlying that, people have rationales. They say, well, it makes sense for this reason, but a lot of it is about they feel guilty. And they feel guilty that if they don't do it exactly the way the care receiver wants, or if they ask someone else for help, that they're going to have what I call triple guilt. So that their care receiver is going to judge them that they're not being a good caregiver. Their family members are going to judge them that they're not being a good caregiver. And that, unfortunately, they're going to judge themselves if they disappoint the care receiver or family members. That somehow they're not being a good daughter, they're not being a good family member, they're not being a good person, they're not being a moral person. I mean, any kind of harsh self-judgment you can think of, I have heard caregivers level at themselves, and truthfully, it's not fair. It's really not fair to them. And if there's one thing I do with all the caregivers I see in psychotherapy, is try to help them be less harsh with themselves, stop riding herd so much in themselves, and cut themselves some slack, and understand that this is a marathon that they have to run strategically, tactically, and the tactics involve being smart and asking other people for help. So, how do we talk back to guilt? And it's almost like we got in our, at any given time, we have a kind of monologue going in our heads where we're talking to ourselves, and we'll say to ourselves, why didn't you handle that right? Why didn't you call this person? Why didn't you forget about this? We can have a kind of nagging voice, not a real voice, but we could be kind of talking to ourselves all the time, and we could be pretty tough on ourselves. And that applies to the way we are caregivers as well. And the way we talk back to guilt, and the way we decrease the intensity of our guilt, is we have to say things which I believe are in fact more realistic. And so here are some examples of that. I'm doing the best I can. There's no shame in that, right? Because guilt and shame are very intricately related. And when people feel guilty, they often, it's not just guilt. Guilt is the definition of guilt is when the way you feel when you've done something wrong. The definition of shame is when there's something about you, inherently about you, that is wrong. And it's sometimes with caregivers, it's not simply that They brought home health aides there, and that was therefore the wrong thing to do, and therefore they feel guilty. It's more like the shame is more like I brought home health aides in to help, and that just shows what a deficient caregiver and deficient person I am, and I feel less than. So shame is a big issue for many people, and including many caregivers. But we can't judge ourselves by unrealistic standards. I'm doing the best I can means exactly that. It means I'm doing the best I can, and the best I can is probably darn good. It's not perfect, it's darn good. So that's one tack I often talk with caregivers about. Another is really basically talking back to not just our own guilt, but the guilt that other people's are trying to put on us. And sometimes people are really pretty inconsiderate about how they try to guilt us into doing things. And I think we have to, in our minds, even if we don't say this out loud, I think we say this to ourselves: others don't get to decide what I should do. I get to decide that, just as any other person does. My siblings, my family members, my parent, other people in my life, they don't have that power to decide for me. I get to decide for me. And that is, to me, is really the essence of being an assertive adult. I mean, we weren't brought into this world simply to do others' bidding. It's extremely important for us to help others as a part of being a good human being. I believe that, but we have to. That's just something. That's our decision. We're not required to do certain things for certain people, because we have to please them all the time. So no, they don't get to decide what we should do. We get to decide that. And the third thing is, sometimes I'm too hard on myself. Self-criticism doesn't make me a better caregiver. And I always like to say here to caregivers, it's like rubbing salt in my own wounds. Caregiving is hard enough. When we then kind of beat ourselves up for the way we caregive, we're making ourselves hurt more. We're rubbing salt in our own wounds. And so I really recommend we talk back to guilt this way. So what do you say to yourself to manage your guilt? How well does it work? And if anybody wants to answer this question, is just guilt. I heard Alice say, well, guilt is just inevitable, right? We're going to be guilty anyway. So if we're going to be guilty anyway, why don't we just do what we think is best? And if we're guilty about it, okay, well, we're guilty about it. But if we did what other people said, we'd feel guilty too. So any thoughts? And Rob, I'm going to leave this to you to just pick a couple before we go on.
I like Martha's responses that cookies solve everything.
Martha, that hits too close to home, right? Because cookies do have a way of making ourselves feel better. And also, I always say, if you want to help other people, like make friends with a doctor or nurses at a hospital, bring a plate of cookies. So I'm a big cookies do have a lot of power in this world. And anything else, Rob?
No, but that does make a good point that as caregivers, we need to reward ourselves for even the small victories, because as you noted, this is hard work. And when something goes well, we need to celebrate that.
That's exactly right. I mean, one of the things, my children are adults now, but I mean, one of the things I repeated to them constantly when they were kids, and maybe especially as teenagers, is to savor the victories. And it's a way of saying, it doesn't always go our way in life. We don't always get patted on the back in life. We have to note and savor every victory. If we get our care receiver to the doctor's appointment on time, if the doctor says to us, "You're doing a good job with your dad," if we are, if our dad tells to us, "Thank you, that was a great meal tonight," we gotta take that, and that's like money in the bank. We gotta hold on to that, and we gotta really feel good about that, even if we're not perfect in other ways. Other comments?
Yeah, Emily says that my getting help means that I can provide the best help So that helps me in letting go of the guilt.
That's exactly right, Emily. When other people help you, they're helping you help your dad, in this case with June. And that means that accepting help, reaching out for help and accepting help makes you a better caregiver. It helps you fulfill the mission that you have for yourself as well. You know, June is invited her dad into her home. She wants to take care of him. It's important to her to do this, to do the best job she can do. She needs to get help from her brothers and other people at the same time. So let me go on. All right. The next thing I just want to touch on, and we've already begun to touch on this in lots of ways, is dealing with family dynamics. So what do we mean by dynamics? You know, it's kind of a fancy word. So when you get a group of people together who know each other really well, and been together for years and years, like a family, a group of individuals, there's certain ways they kind of habitually talk to one another, certain ways they make decisions, there's certain ways that they cooperate with one another or sometimes don't cooperate with one another. And different family members have a tendency to assume different roles. Sometimes, there's a kind of a birth order effect. The older siblings feel like they get to make all the decisions, right? And the little brother and little sister just have to be quiet. Sometimes there's the expectation that as we keep saying, that the females in the family are the caregivers and the males don't have to do this. Or sometimes there's been things that have happened historically in the family that have affected everybody's expectations. So these patterns of communication, decision-making, collaboration, these roles create expectations for how people are going to talk with one another, create how they're going to work with one another when it comes to caregiving. So how do we take this into account? June knows the way her brothers are. She knows the way her father is. She knows the way maybe the family has done caregiving for other family members historically. She knows that there are certain patterns set, there are certain expectations in place. And what I would like to, and I'm going to kind of go on to the next slide, but the way I'd like to say to you is, when we keep in mind some of the family dynamics, and we really think about the family dynamics, we don't, it's like, this is sort of like what they would call implicit knowledge. We just sort of know it. We don't even think about it. We just sort of know it. But to really make it more explicit, to think about it, helps inform our tactics. And I think caregivers not only have to be good problem solvers, they have to be good tacticians. They have to think about what strategies are going to work best to handle situations, but also to handle the people in their lives. So as I heard someone say in the chat box earlier, when we are dealing with different family members, we don't make the same asks to every individual. We have to tailor our asks to what's most likely to get a positive response from that individual. So we're tailoring our asks, and that means we're thinking as a tactician about, what task should I ask this brother? What task should I ask for from that brother? And let's make them as well-defined and as specific in time as possible. Dad needs to go to a doctor's appointment next Tuesday at 2:00. I'm hoping you can take off from work and do that. Can you do that? Right? Very specific. Knowing who to ask for something for the specific task is part of tactics. Knowing the words that can be used, the tone that needs to be used, and to know whether the ask should be made alone or in a group phone call, in person or via text. All these things come into play in dealing with family dynamics and tactics for family dynamics. And the other thing which is really important here is to pick your spots, right? When family members are stressed, if the brother is stressed by work, if the brother is having marital problems, if the brother is filing for bankruptcy, that brother may be so stressed that they're not available to us, and they're not going to be receptive to an ask. So we have to pick our spots. We're looking for times when they are maybe less stressed out and maybe just in a better mood, right? They may be more inclined to say yes. So we're going about this, even though we feel like we shouldn't have to ask, even though we feel like we shouldn't, if we ask, we should just get an immediate yes answer. We want to go about this in a very tactical way. I already said to you, I think caregiving teams have advantages. They also have disadvantages, but the disadvantages we already went over is it's not so easy to coordinate caregiving among multiple people, and that more people, more opinions, more disagreements. You become my family is a family where people love to argue. What that meant is getting more people involved and more arguments, and arguing is almost like a sport in my family. But that's if that slows things, if that brings us to a better answer in the end, go ahead, have those disagreements, have those debates and arguments. If it just slows things down, then maybe it's not such a great idea to involve so many people in the decision making. But the more important issue I heard a number of you say is less pressure on the primary caregiver leads to decreased burnout. So I'm glad that to me is a stronger point here in most families. And I just kind of say briefly a little bit about the qualities of working teams. When you have a bunch of family members, and not necessarily all siblings, but a bunch of family members that are all working well together, there are certain qualities of those caregiving teams that are actually the same qualities of work teams, of baseball teams, of any kind of team. And here are the qualities. And trusted leadership. I have rarely seen caregiving families divide things up exactly equally among family members and have everyone have the same power. It almost never happens that way. It does happen sometimes, but almost never. You always see a primary caregiver. The primary caregiver doesn't mean that's not the person who does it all necessarily, but the primary caregiver is the leader. And the leader is someone who's trusted. So how does a leader win trust? They're a good communicator, and they're good. They frame the decisions that have to be made, and they push the team forward. And that would be what I would hope for June. The other thing about teams is different family members have different roles. Not everybody, maybe somebody's a driver, maybe someone is someone working from long distance, maybe they send money. Maybe someone works in healthcare. They can talk with a doctor. They can talk with a nurse. We have a communication process, and I would recommend for teams that families meet together at least quarterly to actually talk through what a caregiving plan would be, and actually to make decisions during those quarterly meetings. And then the one thing else that good working teams have is they not only have a process for communicating and making decisions, but then they have a process for reviewing those processes. They say things like, how are we doing? Are we working well together? If we're not working well together, what can we change to help us work better together? Right? And that would be, I would hope that any leader would be able to do that, to be able to take feedback and say, we talk about things too much, or we talk about things too little, or we need to get more information before we make decisions. Whatever changes somebody suggests and becomes part of the conversation. But these in general are the qualities of working teams. Okay. Just out of curiosity, and we'll do this briefly before we go into one other topic. Do you have a caregiving team? I saw at the beginning, I asked you how many of you are solo caregivers, how many of you get a little bit of help, lots of help, and I saw lots of ones and twos, which means that a lot of you are solo caregivers, and some of you are getting some help, and then others are getting more help. But who has a caregiving team, and what's worked well for you? If you have a team, what's helped people on your team? What's helped people in the family, maybe neighbors, maybe church congregants? What's helped with that, make that team run better, so that it's helping the care receiver and it's helping the primary caregiver? Any responses, Rob? Whoops, let me go back.
Yes, there is. Most people are saying that either they're going at it alone, or it's themselves and one other family member, a spouse or a child. One person says that they don't have a caregiving team, but they have an emotional support team.
Well, that's extremely important, and that they may not be doing the hands-on work. They may not be buying Ensure and driving to the physical therapy appointment, but they're providing another facet of caregiving, which is they're providing emotional support to the caregiver. So that's very important.
Another person says that within their family, they have established a barter system. She says, I'm a terrible cook, but I love to babysit and clean. So I asked my brother, who loves to cook, to prepare 2 meals a week, and I babysit for him in exchange.
What a great barter. And I'm with you. I'm a terrible cook, but I love to clean. And so whatever works, right? Whatever negotiation you come up with to come to some agreed upon process, and so long as it gets done. And that must really, being able to kind of swap a bit, tasks like that, and really pool your talents must help everybody. It must really also kind of kindle the sense of cooperation. We're in this together, and we're all bringing a little something to the soup here, to the broth, to make it taste better in the long run. So that's great. Okay, I'm going to skip the next slide because I want to get to this next section. And I mentioned it at the beginning that a lot of today would be about advocating for ourselves. And I heard some great ideas for how caregivers could advocate for themselves. And I think a lot of you could give June some really good advice about how to do that. Now I want to talk a little bit about a different kind of advocacy, and that is advocating for all caregivers, not just for ourselves. And so what do you do to help other caregivers? How does that help them? But I'm going to underscore this last question here. How does helping other caregivers help you? Why is this important? Why am I including this in this presentation? Any thoughts from anybody? Why would helping other caregivers, help?
Sharing of ideas and resources, primarily.
Great. So, we can talk shop, and I'll know about a good place to a good doctor who's patient, and I'll tell you about it, and you'll tell me about a great place to get bargains for diapers or something if you need something like that.
Another person says, by helping others, you end up helping yourself.
Well, that's the question I'm asking. How does that happen? How does helping others help you?
Sharing my experiences with other caregivers, getting perspective. That's a great answer.
That's a terrific answer. So what I'm understanding about that is there's something about telling other people our story. It helps us understand our own story better. That we have to put what our experience is into words, and in a way that kind of gives us a little bit of observing distance from it. And so we can say, this was hard. This is what I did well. And then we can say, what, I said to that person that I did the stuff well. And you know what, I did do that stuff well. And let me give myself a pat on the back for that, because I don't usually.
Also say that it helps them to realize that they are not alone in this journey.
Extremely important. And that's not just true of helping other people, that's true of just talking with other people, being with other people, or having kind of a mutual helping experience, as you often have in a caregiver support group. Just knowing you are not alone. I mean, because as most of you could probably attest, and this is not today's topic, but it could be, many caregivers become very, very isolated as people who don't get it, who don't understand, kind of back away, and then we're left alone. But when you have folks that understand and can swap resources with you and can just commiserate with one another and be that emotional support team for one another, then that makes us all feel so much better. I just want to add, go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, and one more that I really like here is that it helps increase my self-confidence.
Perfect. That when we're able to help other people, what it says is, I have, through the caregiving experience, I've learned some things. I've gained some skills, and those skills and that knowledge has value to other people, and that means that that I've grown during caregiving. I have something to offer other people, And that helps with the self-confidence. It also helps us make positive meaning of caregiving. You know, caregiving can sometimes be drudgery. Maybe a lot of times it can be drudgery. And it's certainly not easy. It is hard. But if we can find ways to recognize the positive difference that we're making to our care receiver and the positive difference we may be making to other people in teaching them, in encouraging them, in being an emotional support person for them, then that helps us feel better about what we're doing and makes us feel, frankly, like better people. So helping other people really, to me, helps us tremendously, and I recommend it wholeheartedly.
And there's one more, Barry, I want to point out, because it does take us back to where we started in this conversation. Meeting with other family caregivers allows me to vent without feeling guilty.
And that is fantastic because, when we have reciprocity, when we have mutuality, when we're sharing with them and they're sharing with us, when we're patting them on the back and they're patting us on the back, we all feel better. We're in this boat together. We know it's hard. Our situations may not be identical, but they're similar enough that we get it. We're walking the walk, accompanied by somebody else who gets it and is really supporting us as we go forward, just as we're supporting them as they go forward. So I have one more, actually two more slides to show, and then I want to see if folks have questions or any other comments. So, I just to kind of give you some other suggestions in terms of reaching out to other caregivers to help them. I'm sure many of you are on Facebook, and I'm sure many of you have already discovered that Facebook is rich with caregiver Facebook groups. There are many, many Facebook groups, and they're really a great place in most instances for sharing experiences. And I've seen people just pour their hearts out in their comments in Facebook groups about caregiving. And then I'll tell you also that there are specific organizations, national organizations like Caregiver Action Network or Rosalind Carter Institute or Well Spouse Association that have online platforms that let people share comments, talk to one another, share stories with one another. And then we've already mentioned caregiver support groups. And I'm going to go so far as to say is that if someone has been doing this for a few years and a newbie comes into a group, or someone in your neighborhood, or someone in your church or synagogue, or someone you're meeting, who's an acquaintance, but you didn't know them in the context of caregiving, and they suddenly are saying to you, "Hey, you've been doing this for a while, teach me the ropes." You become a caregiver mentor to them, and that's a very gratifying role to play and a very important role to play to help them. And hopefully along the way, when you were at the beginning of caregiving, you had a mentor too. So I always talk about paying it forward. I'll help you, and then one day you'll help somebody else. And that's how we form caring communities for one another. All right, last one I'm going to mention before we open it up for comments and questions. I just want to say that, caregivers do have, I said to you at the beginning that when I talk about advocacy, I'm not talking about, necessarily getting on the picket line or writing to your congressman, but there really is something to be said for all of us to take a proactive role with our policymakers. And so here's some easy ways to let people know that caregiving is important, that caregivers are important, and we need more resources. So when you go to a healthcare provider, or you're using a direct, durable medical equipment provider, anybody who you're using their services, they'll send you a customer satisfaction survey. Fill them out. Let them know what they did right. Let them know what they did wrong. Tell them how they could be better. Tell them why caregivers are so important. Use those opportunities because, frankly, those surveys matter. In these businesses, what the customer says, and you're a customer, it matters. There are folks that have really made caregiving their mission. I grew up in a caregiving family. This has become my career. But to write articles, to make presentations, to talk about it with other people, let people know how important caregiving and caregivers are. Let your public officials know. So here I am saying, write those letters to your city councilman and to your congressman. because they, Congress now, the federal government is doing more, and the state government is doing more to help caregivers, but they should do even more than they've already done. Attending public hearings on caregiver initiatives, and then volunteering for disease-specific organizations like the National Parkinson's Foundation or Alzheimer's Association, or for national caregiver advocacy organizations. So I'll just show you. Let me just show that one slide now and open this up for maybe 5 or 10 minutes of questions. Any thoughts about anything we've talked about today in regards to advocating for yourself with your family, advocating for other caregivers? Any questions? What's on your mind?
So Barry, we do have a few questions that were put into the chat. But before we get to those, there was a statement that was put in the chat that I wanted to share because it was talking about guilt. And I think it's fantastic. The caregiver says, when I'm feeling guilty, I have to take an honest look at the standard and make sure it's realistic or reasonable. If not, I need to recalibrate my assessment. I think that is such a smart way of addressing the guilt and saying, hey, wait a minute, is this really something that I should worry myself about?
What a great comment. And actually, I'm wondering if the person who made that comment is a therapist, or more specifically a cognitive behavioral therapist, because that's the whole basis for what's known as type of psychotherapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy, that the standards that we hold are often too high and unrealistic, and that we have to make our standards more realistic, and therefore have to recalibrate them. So if we say to ourselves, I can't ever forget, Dad, to pick up Dad's medicines at the pharmacy, and one day we forget to pick up the medicines exactly on time, or we forget to refill something, and we're slapping our forehead saying, how could I do that? How could I do that? This is my dad. The fact is, we're human beings. We do the best we can. We have to say to ourselves all the time, doing the best I can and doing a good caregiver is not perfection. It's taking care of most of the things most of the time.
That is so true. One of our caregivers asked about how can they develop better advocacy skills? Are there classes that are available? Is there somewhere online they can go and look and read about that? How do you, if you haven't been an advocate in the past, how do you start nurturing those skills?
So let me answer that question 2 ways. So one way is very specific, right? So there are certain things that caregivers need to know how to do, and oftentimes there's specific skills like managing a pill box, like maybe managing medical equipment if your care receiver has a feeding tube, or needs other specific medical procedures. Maybe they need to be transferred from a commode and onto the bed. I mean, there are specific skills that hopefully our healthcare professionals are teaching us, but they're also skills that we can learn about on YouTube, because there's an instructional video about anything under the sun, or we can learn from Age of Central Texas or from the Capital Area Agency on Aging. There are always folks that can teach us these skills, and that helps us feel like, I know what I'm doing. I'm not just kind of bumbling around here. I actually know something. But the other way I want to answer that question about efficacy has to do with being assertive, of having that confidence. And we have to, if we feel less than, if we feel ashamed about the way we're a caregiver, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're doing our care receiver a disservice. We have to take confidence that in the fact that our care receiver is well cared for, and that we may not be doing exactly the job that they want us to do. We may not doing the job of doing it exactly how someone else thinks we should do it. We may not be perfect. We may know our imperfections, but we're doing a good job, and we have to take. And that over time, caregiving is a learning experience. We learn things. We learn what our care receiver needs. We oftentimes know better what they need than other people do, including the professionals. And we have to trust ourselves, and we have to value our knowledge that we have gained through experience. So that's all part of efficacy.
And I would also say that, we mentioned it before, support groups are such a wonderful way of being able to learn from other caregivers, to surround ourselves with other caregivers. And in time with support groups, we learn to find our own voice many times, and in a very safe way, and being surrounded by people who are going through the same journey that you are. You know, Age of Central Texas offers support groups, both in person and virtual. The Alzheimer's Association has a number of them as well. There are lots of opportunities here in Central Texas to be a part of a support group.
That's great. I think being of value to other people in the support group, knowing that you're of value of them, having them say to you, thank you so much for sharing that you gave me such great ideas. It helps us. It helps us feel like we are making a difference for them. And that's very important. Maybe one or two more questions, Rob.
You bet. Got a couple questions on legal issues. So where do things like the power of attorney come into play on this? So, you know, if I'm the primary caregiver and I've got the power of attorney, how does that reflect when I've got other family members who are coming in and saying, oh, you're doing everything wrong and we're going to stir the pot and leave? And then another question about, we talked about siblings who are in other states. Besides just being able to send money, what are some other suggestions on what we could ask them to do to help and support?
All right, let me answer the second question first, because it's a little bit easier than the first question. Second question, it really pertains to what's called long distance caregivers. And long distance caregivers, I think, are in a pretty tough spot. And that is they want to be helpful, but they don't really know how. As a matter of fact, oftentimes they're clueless about what help is really helpful. And so we have to do two things. If we're on the front lines and someone who's 3 states away says, how can I be of help? We tell them very specifically, this is what I need from you. And so here's some suggestions. Certainly sending money, handling some insurance matters sometimes helps. They can handle some administrative things they can do remotely. They don't have to be on the front lines, but also spend a week or 2 weeks during this next year when you're going to come and you're going to be on the front line and I'm going to get a break. You're going to give me respite. That's often the best way long distance caregivers can be of help. And that, sometimes that's more than they want to do, but if they're if they want to know specifically what they can do to help, that is help. That's mostly helpful. So that's my response to that. In terms of the legal question, what I'll say is, so power of attorney, we can, there's a lot that can be said about the whole legal issues around caregiving. Powers of attorney, just as a reminder, only come into effect when the care receiver is unable to make an informed decision, that they lack the cognitive capacity, they lack the ability to express themselves. If that's the case, then the caregiver may be responsible for healthcare decisions or financial decisions. That doesn't mean that they're not going to still get criticized by other family members. But it also means, though, that they have the last word on caregiving decisions. And that other people can express their opinions, but they need to understand that their opinions are that you're going to take them into account. But as the power of attorney, ultimately it's your responsibility to make the best decision how. And that sometimes people who are not the power of attorney don't like that, right? They don't understand why you got chosen power of attorney and they didn't, and so there's a little jealousy and there's a little resentment. But that's the case. If you are the power of attorney because the care receiver is unable to make decisions for themselves, then your responsibility is to make the best decision you can. Hopefully that the other family members will still be willing to participate, and hopefully you'll still be willing to delegate to them.
And that someone had a great idea here in the chat for folks that are out of state, is have them Zoom or FaceTime with your family member. That can give you a good 30, 45 minutes of your life back that you can go do what you need. Put them in front of the computer, in front of the laptop, in front of the tablet, and let them talk live with one of their other children. And that will be so beneficial for both.
Great idea. So I see folks are kind of slowly getting off the call. I want to make sure that I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I just want to show you one last thing. Well, here I am, and you can, if you have questions, you can always email me. Happy to answer the best I can. And I do have 2 books. I'm just going to show them to you briefly, but if you're interested in more of what my thoughts are about caregiving, these 2 books have a lot of different ideas. And then I just want to say, I want to stop sharing, and I want to say thank you, because you have been an incredibly participative audience. This has been a great conversation. You have shared a million good ideas. Ron, I want to thank you so much for being a wonderful facilitator and collaborator here. You had some great ideas. I don't think we kind of solved all of caregiving's problems, but I will, I'm going to say to you that I think we share some things for all of us to think about. I learned from you, you learned from me. That's the way we help each other. That's the way we feel good. That's the way we make a difference to others, and the way we gain some sense of meaning for our caregiving. So thank you all. I'm going to just show on the screen one more time, because someone was asking for the names of the books. Here are the names of the books again. Meditations for Caregivers. This is an AARP branded book, and the other one is the Emotional Survival Guide for Caregivers. Very different books. So you can buy them both. But that's not, I'm not here to sell books, but I'm here to really talk with you about caregiving, because guess what? Caregiving, sharing my thoughts about caregiving and trying to help you guys is very meaningful to me. It makes a big difference to me. It helps me in my life and with my guilt. So I'm in the same boat you are. I'm trying to do good in the world and trying to get over whatever guilt I have. So thank you very much, Rob, and thank you very much, Patty, for having me. And look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you so much, Barry. And I will be the first to say Barry's books are amazing. So definitely look for those books, because they can be very helpful. I also wanted to mention one other thing. Someone in the chat asked about how can I start planning for my caregiving journey? And AARP is our sponsor this year for our Caregiver Conference, and Barry writes for AARP as well. They have an amazing free publication that you can download from the AARP website. It's called the Prepare to Care Booklets. And I think every caregiver should go look at that. You go to aarp.org and you can find it there and download the PDF. It will help you with so many things, including what we're talking about today, on how can you involve your family members and do it in a way that everybody feels like they're coming out of it in a good way instead of being put upon. So that's one last thing I want to leave you with, is a fantastic resource. It's available to you for free. I want to thank you so much for joining us today for our first of 4 sessions for this year's Striking a Balance Caregiver Conference. We'll be back again tomorrow at the same time, 2 p.m. You can use your same Zoom link. It will be the same for all this week to join us for the rest of our sessions. Barry, once again, thank you so very much. Thank you, Patty, for joining us. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.
Barry, thank you again. Appreciate it.